News broke out last night about a possible controversy regarding the college helmet communication. Long story short, the story is that the communications within the helmets were unencrypted communication. Therefore, there is a possibility that it could be transmitted via third party to other sources. And over the weekend, it was confirmed that the 68 Power 4 schools have all sent their helmets back to the manufacturer to ensure that the communication is now quote unquote encrypted. And it's definitely raising some eyebrows regarding a number of different schools, particularly Texas Tech, who announced that they're going to be using a completely third party software for their game versus Iowa State, even though it has been announced that all of the teams have returned the helmets and they should be ready by game time. Now, from my understanding, this was just released last night. Uh, Max Max Olson of ESPN released a really good article that articulates exactly what went down, what they're doing about it, and most importantly, if this is going to be impactful for the rest of the season. Now, as far as I can see, this really doesn't seem like a big deal, and I would certainly argue it's not a big deal for a number of reasons. I mean, the Texas Tech AD Kirby Hocutt, essentially said like, hey, this is supposed to be a game of integrity of competition and making sure all the rules are straight. We're pretty much not going to take any chances regarding the communication and making sure that everything is fair and equitable. And also had a couple comments from also Baylor's athletic director Mac Rhodes, who essentially said, hey, we'll do whatever the Big 12 and the NCAA wants us to do. We're happy to cooperate with the investigation however way we can. And no, Texas Tech not necessarily saying that something happened, but you know, maybe part of their concern was the fact that Baylor put up 60 on them last week. Now, I don't think anybody, including me, was certainly expecting Baylor to put up 60 on Texas Tech, but at the same time, for anyone who's watched Texas Tech at all this season, they would know that Texas Tech does not play a single ounce of defense whatsoever. So for Sawyer Robertson and or DeQuan Finn, whoever's starting for them now, for them to put up 60 is certainly definitely not something I was expecting, but you know, it's definitely going to be something that's talked about within the next week or so of college football. So I figured get ahead of it and have a brief discussion about it. But this is the first year of the helmet, the helmet communication, and obviously there's going to be some wrinkles. It's fairly similar to what it is in the NFL, where the quarterback can communicate with the head coach, and for the defense, it's the linebacker cuts off after 15 seconds for the play clock. So everything's fine there. And this was essentially triggered by the whole Connor Stallions sign stealing controversy, which I think is a whole another video that I can get into, but I'm not going to here. But I think there are a number of reasons why Texas Tech's reaction is somewhat sensationalized for a couple of different reasons. I'd say first and foremost, as somebody who's been watching and covering college football for a number of years now, I have a hard time believing that the integrity of the game has been in question at any point. Now, obviously, you don't want to take any sort of chance whatsoever, but I've never sat there in my years of watching college football and said to myself, you know what, that's kind of fishy, or this could be possibly rigged in any sort of way. Now, granted, you can get into, for example, Florida State not getting into the college football playoff. You can get into some of the officiating that we've seen this year, but at the same time, there's a big difference between someone getting screwed out of a playoff spot or a couple bad calls versus suggesting or insinuating that certain teams are getting advantage over others too. And for the most part too, yes, there is a little bit of a transition period in terms of getting the ball rolling in terms of the college football communication, but it seems like for the most part it's working for everybody. Now, there's always going to be a handful of teams that, still have their signals, still have their signs, particularly maybe for the teams that are a little bit more fast paced. Well, they'll still have the little banners that people hold up and say, hey, this is for this play, this is for that play, this is for this route, this is for that route too. But you know, I've never sat there and questioned it myself. I would be definitely fascinated to see if anybody in here feels differently, but I've always been the type of person that definitely gives the benefit of the doubt to the NCAA, to, whoever regarding this whole situation. And it seems like for the past month or so was probably under wrap, maybe just some internal dialogue, some rumblings in terms of whether anybody has noticed any sort of, controversy the regarding the helmet communication. But even it was announced for the most part by the Big 12 commissioner that the likelihood that any of this could be compromised, is really, slim to none. They did interview a couple of people confidentially, and essentially, which is essentially my point going to this whole thing is, okay, let's say hypothetically that you can somehow decode, or you somehow have a transcript of what they're saying. So you're trying to tell me within this entire time frame. Now, granted, it cuts off after 15 seconds. So within this whole short time period span, you're able to transmit the play, able to transmit the communication, being able to translate the play, and then being able to communicate it to your team all within this 15-20 second time span. I just have a hard time believing that, regardless if it's encrypted or, unencrypted, etc. Now, obviously, the first couple times, yes, it's a test pilot. Yes, there's going to be trials and errors going into all of this, but the reality is that, yes, the helmets are going to be ready on Saturday, and if it's another layer of protection for, the coaches, the athletes, and all that, that's great. I mean, I think everybody is on board that any way you can make the game, more fair for other teams, and always assuring that the integrity of the game is, of the utmost importance. I think everybody is all for that too. But, I think if you read the headline of it, it's not necessarily misleading, but I think it definitely is one of those things that it's definitely a little bit not as controversial as I think some people might read it. But I think we're over the next couple weeks, we're going to have some other athletic directors, some other conference commissioners possibly comment on this too. But in general, I don't see this really going very far. I mean, even if you got the transcripts, in order for you to decode that, translate that, communicate that, and make all the adjustments in time for it to be ready, is one thing. And obviously, it's another thing too. If you're Michigan, you steal a couple signs, and you figure out what means what. That's one thing. I mean, you could even go back, if you want to talk about the NFL. That's part of the reason why Tampa beat Oakland in the Super Bowl that year, was because John Gruden pretty much figured out that, hey, when Bill Callahan took over, they didn't adjust any of the lingo. They knew exactly what they were going to run, and then they ended up winning. So it's like, where do you find the balance between, quote unquote cheating versus, just being able to figure out certain things? Now, obviously what Connor Stallions did is that's cheating, and, compromising the integrity of the game, having essentially a group that just went around the games for the sole intended purpose of just stealing signs and communicating it to people. That's a lot different than, watching some game film with your team on a Tuesday afternoon, and figuring out after the 15th time that, that Byron Morton of Texas Tech does a certain helmet touch, for example, and that maybe means that, they're sliding to protection or something like that. So moving forward, I definitely encourage everyone to read that article, because, as someone who's passionate about college football, I'm always, always want to make sure that the game is fair, that the rules are enforced, and